name's Daniel Schwartkopff, and I founded the world's first licensed Bitcoin sportsbook. So essentially, we're a company that's licensed and incorporated in Curaçao, which is in the Dutch Antilles. We take Bitcoin only as a form of payment. We launched officially on the 10th of June, 2014. And it's a Bitcoin-only operation, so we only take Bitcoin in, we pay Bitcoin out. We've got clients in, all the regulated gaming jurisdictions in the world, and we've launched some major products since we've started. We've launched Casino in November 2014, and Poker launched in March of 2015. Currently, we're developing some really interesting new things, like a peer-to-peer betting exchange on the blockchain, using sort of multi-sig addresses, which is quite a cool new technology. And I was recently presenting at the iGaming Asia conference in Hong Kong on a panel with John Matonis, who was the sort of executive director of the Bitcoin Foundation. And he was saying also that approximately, around about 40% of all Bitcoin transactions are gambling related. So it's really a growth industry in terms of sort of Bitcoin in general. And Bitcoin and iGaming, it's sort of ideally suited to Bitcoin. It's something that has sort of several advantages, which I can go through. Instant deposits and withdrawals 24/7, which is a major advantage that the traditional sports books don't have. Cross-border payments that take several days to do a withdrawal. And that's one of the things that our clients find sort of makes Bitcoin the ultimate digital betting chip. There's no credit card fees, and we therefore have much lower overheads. We don't have to deal with any of that legacy banking infrastructure. And it generally is very useful in terms of that. So we can operate with lower margins and give the clients better odds. So there's actually a major advantage there for a sort of a margin business like sports betting, where you have sort of, and especially in casino, where you've got margins of between 3 and 8%. Paying 2% or even 1% to a bank is sort of a major cut into your sort of profit margins. So being able to reduce that allows us to operate more effectively and even give better prices to clients than you could get at a traditional sort of cash sportsbook. We don't have any FICA KYC licensing or equivalent requirements, which is generally a very onerous procedure for users, and they generally do not want to sort of get involved with that situation. So it's generally they'll find the path of least resistance. So a Bitcoin client will not sign up at a Bitcoin site where he will have to provide KYC documents. Generally, people like to be sort of light and anonymous and not provide too much information, which is quite an interesting facet of the Bitcoin user that you have to deal with to sort of market and deal with customer retention and so on. We can also extend acceptance to countries which are not covered by Visa or MasterCard. And it provides a payment method for the unbanked. So essentially, people that did not have access to credit cards and banking infrastructure in the past now have the ability to do that through Bitcoin. We don't have to deal with fraud or fraudulent chargebacks at all, ever. It's all instant, irreversible payments, which is a major benefit for gambling, sort of gaming companies, because in the past, it's traditionally been quite a big deal. Often clients will sort of make a bet, lose, and then try to claim the money back from the bank by saying the credit card was stolen, which leads to a very sort of arduous procedure whereby the sort of gambling company has to prove that the client placed the bet and so on, and the banks always place sort of their trust and the reasonable doubt on the company to prove it instead of the user. We're not subject to payment embargoes. We can take payments from any country, and our processing fees are essentially zero. I had an interesting map of the global legal attitudes towards Bitcoin, but I'll have to leave that out. Essentially, the only countries with issues are Iceland and Vietnam, where it is ostensibly illegal. Sort of the only contentious countries really are sort of China, Russia, Ukraine, some of the other Southeast Asian countries. The reasons for it being illegal in Vietnam and Iceland were essentially just capital flight, but otherwise, generally, the rest of the world is very permissive. So the current landscape of Bitcoin and iGaming is that the decentralized nature of Bitcoin inhibits the third-party shutdown. So it's quite a safe infrastructure, and that is sort of to invest in, because there's going to be no fiscal easing. Nobody's going to be able to print 100,000 Bitcoin and sort of devalue the currency in that way. But the exchanges will be a focal point of the government scrutiny in future. There's already pressure on some of the larger merchants that do accept Bitcoin, especially in the US, to sort of comply with the new AML and KYC guidelines in that sort of the world. But it's not currently regulated as legal tender in terms of gambling. It's sort of like play money poker chips. It's essentially the same as playing with play money poker chips on Facebook. It could just as well be Bitcoin. So in the United States, which is sort of the main hub of Bitcoin activity at the moment, apart from sort of China, but definitely the vast amount of activity is definitely still in the US. You're subject to AML and KYC guidelines and licensed as money services businesses, and you have to be also on a federal level, and on the state level you have to be licensed as money transmitters. So it's actually quite an issue to operate these virtual currency exchanges. But a license is not actually required to operate any Bitcoin gaming services. Nobody requires that. We went out to seek a Bitcoin license so that we could sort of be future-proof our business. We're in the game for the long term. We're not trying to short-term profiteer anything. And it's also a great marketing angle, as we're the only licensed Bitcoin sportsbook provider. And that's a major advantage for us because whereas previously all the other competing sportsbooks and casinos are sort of in the shadows run by people that aren't sort of visible, we're a visible company with sort of visible management, and that's the reason we can actually do conferences like this in sort of iGaming Asia and the conference in Manila that I'm going to in about a month. So essentially, what it allows us to do is sort of market on sort of a base level to sort of the traditional media, whereas we wouldn't have got coverage if we tried to stay anonymous. In terms of the current landscape of Bitcoin and iGaming, there's various risk management strategies. So essentially, there are two types of casino or sportsbook models that people can go with. And you can do Bitcoin only, which you sort of take Bitcoin in and pay Bitcoin out, or you can take Bitcoin in using a company like PayFast, for example, and convert that to sort of US dollars or rand or whatever the primary currency that you're going to be gambling in. And the difference is that sort of clients do want to get paid out in Bitcoin. It's not really a viable operation to take Bitcoin in as a sort of a payment method. And we found that that sort of isn't the ideal way to go about things. There's a lot of additional reasons, which I'll cover in the next slide. Sort of the first sort of pioneering dice site, Satoshi Dice, they had an April 2012 launch, and they sold for 126,000 Bitcoin in July 2013, which is about 12.4 million US dollars at the time. It was only less than a year old, and they, from an April 2012 launch to July 2013, 12.4 million US dollars. It's clearly a big sort of growing gambling market. There's several major Bitcoin-only operators. It's Cloudbet, Nitrogen Sports, BetVIP. All the rest of them are anonymous. They're not really sort of run by any, it's sort of some faceless entity, which gives us quite a big advantage in that space. We're the first and only licensed Bitcoin sportsbook. And we found that really builds trust with the consumers. So in terms of key drivers of growth, what's really helped us to move forward, we've been able to develop our product in sort of such a way by having these sort of key industry relationships, because we are sort of visible and can attend conferences and so on. We've been able to get these sort of key industry partners who's provided us with sort of the #1 content packages and sort of the most sports, most games, best odds. We've got live in-play odds for thousands of games. Basically any sport you can think of, from sort of under 18 amateur Algerian soccer leagues to, sort of bandy or some of these bizarre sort of Eastern European sports that most people have never heard of. So the benefit in terms of product is that clients are able to move money anywhere instantly without KYC. So if you have the best product, it's natural that clients will come to you. In terms of the traditional cash gambling world, because of the sort of onerous KYC procedures, clients are much more sticky to each platform, and they're much less likely to move around because of having to go through that process again, submit documents, take a few days to get approved. Your first withdrawal takes a few days to get approved. whereas with Bitcoin, all of those things are instant. So essentially, having the best product means you win. You will get sort of a lot of users, a lot of clients very quickly. If you've got sort of the best product in the Bitcoin space, you can't just sit idly by and hope that, you know, sort of your customer retention or something like that would keep them with you, just because of loyalty's sake. Bitcoin clients are sort of notoriously sort of unloyal. It's basically just a pure free market economy. But from SEO, we went from nowhere to sort of the top 2 results for Bitcoin sportsbook and many of the other related terms. We found that sort of focusing on SEO is sort of a very good strategy in terms of the Bitcoin market, because you can't really do pay-per-click advertising on Google or Facebook for gambling related terms. And PR, we were featured in some major international publications and websites like the Wall Street Journal, CoinDesk, The Telegraph, Gambling Insider, iGaming Review, etc., and some of the major broadsheets in the UK, Business Day in South Africa. And focusing very highly on forum presence and affiliate marketing. So Bitcoin's a very highly community-driven product and process, and it's something that you have to sort of engage with people often on a personal level, because a lot of it still in this early stage of the currency is about trust. So some of the major challenges that we've had to deal with, security, number one. It is a major issue. You will sort of get hacking attempts daily. You'll get DDoSed. You'll get ransom messages. You know, people will DDoS your site and say, like, pay me 10 Bitcoins or we won't turn it back on again. So security is a major concern. I mean, we've had threats from people. It's definitely something you have to deal with in terms of the Bitcoin gambling world, because it's sort of currency that you have and own, sort of on a virtual system that sort of hackers can take. So I mean, obviously gambling will be sort of a major target for them. But we've managed to overcome all of that. We haven't had any severe major issues, and it's just generally something to take care of. And you should. Sort of a key point in that is never to have all the payment processes automated. I personally or some of the staff vet each withdrawal by having it automated and having the ability just to click a button on sort of the admin interface on the back end of your website and make a Bitcoin payment is a really bad idea, because if hackers do get into the back end of your system and they can issue withdrawals to themselves, etc. So I would always recommend a 2-factor authentication as a minimum. In terms of the payment processes, that is sort of an issue as well. We were using Coinbase in the US for a while, until they launched their regulated US exchanges, at which point they sort of declined any sort of online gambling clients, and we had to make a switch over to our current provider in Germany, Qubits, which has actually been really great, good company. So understanding the gambling market restrictions is also quite a big issue to go through. You sort of have to know where you can and can't advertise. For example, you know, Google and Facebook, you can't advertise in most countries, gambling terms. So you have to try and target the Bitcoin users where they are, and where are they? You know, for example, most Bitcoin users apparently have an account on Bitcoin Talk, which is sort of one of the major Bitcoin forums. There are a couple of other ones. But just actually knowing the community, knowing where the people are is sort of a big thing. It's sort of something that you have to learn through experience. It's definitely not like traditional marketing at all. Some of my previous companies, I mean, we built up to about 500,000 users on some of those, and the marketing strategies and tactics that we had to use in this business is completely different. So another topic that we're trying to broach is to convert traditional cash sportsbook players to Bitcoin. And we've run some customer surveys, and we found about 20-30% of clients actually buy Bitcoin just to gamble on our site. It's because they just find the withdrawal process a lot easier, especially to do cross-border transactions and so on. And obviously those cross-border transactions don't come with all the currency fees, etc., that you would get normally. So one of the challenges with these sort of anonymous user base is customer relationship management. Sort of how do you keep in contact, and how do you sort of engage with clients that are relatively anonymous when they want to provide you with as little information as possible? You essentially have to sort of engage them on site, often with a tool like Intercom, which is quite useful. You sort of email at best. I mean, our email open rates are ridiculously low. It's probably like 3 to 5%. Because these users don't actually deal with anything like that. So actually keeping in touch with these users and providing them with new offers, etc., is quite difficult. Sort of in terms of legal challenges, legislation and the place of effective management and so on, it's actually, we've dealt with a lot of issues in terms of where our company is established. Our company is only established in Curacao. All the effective management and decision making is done there. We do sort of none of that here in South Africa. We've outsourced a couple of our support functions all over the world, and we pay all of those sort of staff members in Bitcoin. We pay our server hosting in Bitcoin. We pay most of our expenses actually in Bitcoin. So we're sort of trying to move everything over into that space where we don't actually have to convert things into traditional currency. One of the major differences between sort of the support structure of a traditional casino or site and a Bitcoin sportsbook is that support and withdrawals need to be instant 24/7. Clients will not wait around. They want an answer immediately. In terms of traditional customer support, you, for example, will have a site, say, operating in South Africa from 9 till 5. Maybe you'll get email or phone support until 10 p.m. We kind of have to answer emails at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., or 24 hours a day, essentially, because we've got clients all over the world. But these clients also, because of Bitcoin's sort of instant nature, they expect everything to be instant. So that's definitely something we have to work with. That's also one of the reasons that traditional sportsbooks accepting Bitcoin and transferring into cash is an issue for them, because they can't deal with sort of the support, and on that scale they usually take a few days to process withdrawals, etc. One of the other issues is risk management with shrewd punters. So essentially what we do is, as a risk management strategy, all sportsbooks do it. If a guy wins too much, you sort of reduce the amount that he can bet as a maximum on games. And with knowing so little about the users, we have to identify some clever new ways of doing that, because there's no way of actually telling if the same guy signed up twice, maybe through a different IP address or a VPN or something, and it's the same guy we limited a week ago, and now he's back just under a different name. So we have to identify all sort of new, unique rules-based systems, machine learning stuff, where we'd have to look at the back end and on exactly sort of how these users' patterns of betting and their IP address and so on. Looking to the future, Bitcoin. So Bitcoin and iGaming, so it's basically a democratization of the iGaming market, similar to what was seen 15 years ago. With the removal of the upfront capital requirements and brick and mortar investments that the traditional sort of gaming industry went through when iGaming and sort of online gambling started to become prevalent. And I think in terms of those major steps, sort of brick and mortar gambling, online gambling, Bitcoin is the next big thing. It's a hyper-efficient affiliate system. You can pay out to anyone, anywhere, instantly, without the need for currency exchange fees. So that's very useful. You can actually have affiliates in any country in the world operating for you at any time of day, and you can pay them even micropayments without any banking fees or hassles or transactions. The emergence of Bitcoin regulations is a work in progress. It'll take many years, even in leading markets like the United States. I wouldn't expect any of the major Bitcoin or regular sort of iGaming sportsbooks, casinos to accept Bitcoin anytime soon. It's a major issue for their regulators and sort of the financial departments and the lawyers, and they just want to stay really far away from it. Casinos can be made provably fair, which is something that is sort of unique to the Bitcoin world. Essentially how it works is that you sort of generate sort of a client seed on your side and the server seed, and the user can actually check that on their own host computer when they're not connected to the internet and verify that the role that they made on the website is exactly the same in terms of chance, etc., that they would have received on their own computer, so that they can know that they weren't cheated by the website. Clients do not necessarily want to be anonymous. I mean, a couple of our users have engaged with us, and it's quite likely that a much more efficient process of KYC will develop in the future, some sort of automated KYC system for Bitcoin. So essentially, gaming cannot afford to shy away from these emerging technologies, as they will eventually become more and more mainstream. Bitcoin is becoming more and more mainstream. I mean, companies like Microsoft are accepting it. ATMs will become commonplace. There's already one right here, sort of in South Africa. They're gaining popularity around the world. Payment processors such as BitPay, Coinbase, PayPal, etc. Are giving merchants easy avenues to Bitcoin acceptance, and acceptance will keep growing. And massive venture capital startups in Bitcoin internationally. I think in the first quarter of 2014, it exceeded $200 million US. So there's a lot of money going into Bitcoin startups recently. And digital currencies are essentially the future of online payments, but as you can see, there's still a few hurdles to overcome. And thank you for your time. Any questions?
My question is, you said you're not dealing with South Africans or individuals that's from restricted jurisdictions, but you also alluded that you don't have any KYC principles or methods that you apply. So how would you know that that person is from South Africa or the US or the restricted areas? Because IP addresses are different and can be created in another space.
Yeah, it's essentially sort of a best attempt on our side. There's actually no regulation or requirements for us to do that because Bitcoin is not sort of a regulated currency. We do that just sort of out of sort of our own respect for their country's legal systems, and we do that based on IP blocking. I mean, there's tons of ways to get around it. It's the same way that the cash sportsbooks in the US do it. If clients want to use a VPN and try and subvert the law, I mean, it's up to them. In our terms and conditions, the clients have to accept that gambling is legal in their jurisdiction. So it's really up to them. But I've had a couple of interesting stories of using Bitcoin around the world. I was in Thailand on an island, and I lost my bank card, and they wouldn't have been able to get one to me for days. So I sold some of the Bitcoin that I had to a local guy in Thailand who Western Unioned me Thai baht, and that took like an hour. So there's a lot of very cool, interesting things you can do with Bitcoin, and it's definitely quite a cool backup option to have. Even a primary option to have instead of, I mean, I got better exchange rates selling it to that guy from Bitcoin than doing a direct transaction from Rand into baht. In terms of actually taking money overseas, you can actually get better exchange rates based on the arbitrage, etc. You're moving to another country in Africa, for example, than if you're actually paying those sort of banking fees, currency exchange fees. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do like that. You can actually make money.
So Daniel, does your business make you a Bitcoin bull? Do you have a lot of future or faith in the future of Bitcoin?
I definitely do have faith in the future of Bitcoin. I think it's sort of moving more into mainstream acceptance. A lot of people are finding it sort of more interesting. I mean, we've been featured in a lot of mainstream publications. It's just a matter of time, really, until sort of Bitcoin becomes sort of a completely mainstream thing. I mean, as we can see with sort of more mainstream companies accepting it, sort of in the US, Tiger Brands, Tiger Direct, Microsoft, Newegg. A lot of those big online tech companies are starting to accept Bitcoin. I mean, Dell, you can buy a Dell laptop online with Bitcoin, I think. So essentially, it's just moving forward. It's just going to keep gaining traction. I'm definitely sort of optimistic on the future of Bitcoin. And especially if it captures a big part of the remittance market. It's sort of set to go, upwards of several $1,000s of value.
Okay, great. If no other questions, we can leave it there. Thanks very much, Dan.
Cool, thank you.